what should a person who's considering investing in property be thinking about, and what do they need to allow for with their first investment?
Yeah. So the first thing that prospective investors always need to look at, whether it's their first property or their 10th property, is what is their borrowing capacity? Okay, so fundamentally, what can they borrow from the bank? What's the size of the loan that they've got the power to service? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to spend every single cent of that borrowing capacity, but you need to understand what you can afford so that you're not getting into trouble in terms of not being able to settle and putting deposits at risk. So once you've understood your borrowing capacity and assuming you're clear on your investment plan and the goals that you've got, then the rubber starts to hit the road with regards to property selection. And not all property is created equal. So on all of these, I shouldn't say all, that's probably a bit harsh. On many of these YouTube videos that I see talking to beginner investors, they say, imagine that you're buying a property for $600,000, then your deposit is going to be $60,000, and they talk as if 10% of the purchase price is enough to get started. And unfortunately, it's not. I'm all for motivating and empowering people to get started as early as they can. We've all been in that position, where you're saving really, really hard for that first property. It doesn't get any harder than trying to accumulate that first deposit. But unfortunately, the deposit by itself is not everything that you need. There are some costs that you encounter anytime that you buy a property. And again, depending on the type of property, these are not all the same. They vary depending on state, they vary depending on purchase price, they vary depending on the type of property that you're buying. So if it's starting to sound like a bit of a complex maze, there are certain things that you need to know, and we'll get into how you can kind of mitigate those risks and upskill most quickly. But as you said, let's start with conveyances. Purchasing a property is a legal transaction between the person selling it and you as the person buying it. In order to initiate that legal transaction, you need a solicitor or a conveyancer to effectively manage that process that we call settlement for you. They charge a fee, generally around $1,500, with some extras for incidentals that they incur on your behalf, and title searches and mortgage registration, things like that. But let's say $2,000 to $2,500 as a round number. Unfortunately, you can't do away without them. They're a necessity as part of this process, as Cam found out all those years ago. When you buy a property as well, the government is taking their clip, if you like, and that's called stamp duty, where property is concerned. Now, stamp duty can be a significant expense. So, if you were looking at round numbers, buying a $650,000 to $700,000 property in Melbourne, where we are, then that stamp duty is going to be around $30,000. So, you probably just heard that thinking, hang on, I've saved really, really hard for, say, the deposit of 60, and I've got to find another half of that. Unfortunately, that's the case. With that said, though, the good news is that you can be smart about what you buy and dramatically shrink that amount of stamp duty that you pay. And by securing and settling on land and then building a house on top of that land, you only pay stamp duty on the land value, not on the whole purchase price. So that's a really key one that allows you to be able to get into the market early, especially if you've got strong cash flow. Covering that interest while the house is being built is much easier and more beneficial, in that you're often getting into the market 12 months earlier and seeing the benefits of that growth. So, if we think about the deposit and how you can circumvent the kind of grind of saving, depending on the price points that you buy at, as we've talked previously, buying at the affordable end of the market quite often attracts certain grants and incentives from the government that can be significant and a great way to turbocharge your deposit. Just recently, the Queensland government announced that the first home buyer grant was being doubled for the next 2 years, so up from $15,000 to $30,000. saving 15,000 overnight effectively, buying it at under 750,000 in Queensland can be a really great way to fast track that deposit. So look, there's a fair bit there, but simply put, it's the deposit itself. Then you've got stamp duty, you've got legals or solicitor conveyancer fees. Allow a couple of thousand for bank fees as well, because that's how banks make their money. There's more than just the deposit to consider.
Well, I'm shocked, Boz, that some people who are on YouTube talking to be experts, that they forget to even talk about stamp duty, other purchasing costs. I'm glad to know that you continue to share everything and make sure that people are well informed of what they are going to be having to pay for. Now, that's not to say we're trying to scare people off and saying they shouldn't invest. They just need to be well informed.